So I've had an interesting few days. At the time of me writing the script for this video, it's the beginning of March. Winter is hanging on here in the Pacific Northwest, and even if there was much sun outside to enjoy, I'd still probably be inside because of, you know, all the plague outside and the large swaths of people who refuse to acknowledge it. Naturally, this means I spend most of my time on social media. My main squeeze is Tumblr because it's largely full of like-minded, brain-rotted, queer, autistic adults who are the same blend of happily insane as me. More than that, though, Tumblr is really, really easy to curate. The only stuff that shows up on your dashboard is stuff you've chosen to see. People make long do not interact lists, which state clear boundaries up front, and you can use the block button pretty liberally, and know with some confidence that no one's really going to complain about it. I mean, they can, but you won't be forced to see that shit. People keep to themselves and their circles, for the most part. I've gotten used to Tumblr. It's culture, its warmth, and its dedication to being the only good social media left. However, I do have friends who are more active on other websites, and so I dabble in other spaces to keep up with what they're doing. Which is, I guess, how I wound up in the maw of the great beast of toxic social media experiences. Twitter. So the other day I got on Twitter, and Twitter does this thing that I hate, where it recs you tweets for topics it thinks you're interested in. It was a tweet about my current special interest, my special interest for the last year, a little visual novel called Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney. The tweet said something to the effect of,
"Seriously, how delusional do you have to be to play Ace Attorney and not think Manfred von HARMA is abusive?"
Now, this is the kind of sentiment where I'd normally just roll my eyes and block OP. If you're unfamiliar, a large portion of the younger, newer AA fanbase has this headcanon about the main villain of the first game, that he's an abusive dad. I don't personally subscribe to it for reasons that will be discussed in length in this video. And I usually just block people who disagree with me because I've found that I haven't really been able to have very meaningful conversations with them on the topic. But as I was going to block OP, I noticed a ton of replies, all to the effect of,
literally, what is that person going on about?
I'm for real going to defend all my fictional faves like this from now on. Red White did that because he had lead poisoning. Matt on God did that because he had lead poisoning.
OP really wrote a whole essay like, "Why are you being mean to my fave child abuser? Sobbing emoji, sobbing emoji, sobbing emoji."
And I realized, holy shit, they're specifically talking about me. Manfred likers are few and far between to begin with. As far as I know, I'm the only one as of late who's written extensively on why I believe him to be a more complex character than he often appears or is written. And I'm definitely the only person who jokes, half serious, about him having lead poisoning. That's how I found out that, while I wasn't paying attention, Ace Attorney's Twitter fandom had found some of my semi-old out-of-context tweets and turned me into their laughingstock of the week. This obviously confused and perplexed me. I'm a nobody on AA Twit. I've seen the way they act, and I am not a fan. The fandom is oversaturated with Fanon characterization, disregarding of anything that isn't male/shipping, and full of a lot of young kids who haven't grown out of their being a bully online to cope phase. I don't interact with any of these people. To be honest, I don't know how they found me, but they did, and for a full 24 hours I was bombarded with the Twitter algorithm feeding me subtweets about myself, simply because they contained the name of one of my favorite characters. A character who I love a lot, and already wanted to make a video essay on as sort of a companion piece to my initial text-based essay that I originally published on Tumblr. And as much as a bunch of online abuse sets all 37 of my mental illnesses on edge, this was also kind of the push I needed to finally get off my ass and start it, so here we are. Manfred von Karma is the final boss, as it were, of the first game in the Ace Attorney trilogy. For those unfamiliar with the series, in Ace Attorney you play as the titular Phoenix Wright, a rookie defense attorney fighting tooth and nail against a system designed to outmatch him. The game is largely a satire on the state of legal proceedings in Japan, most notably of all the 99% conviction rate. Phoenix is, by definition, an underdog facing impossible odds, and it's your job to help him find the truth and secure his client's innocence. Opposite to Phoenix is Miles Edgeworth, a world-renowned prosecutor with an incredibly tough stance on crime. You've probably seen fan art of these two playing tonsil hockey, and I'm here to assure you that whatever happens in these games is a million times gayer. It rocks. But beyond that aspect of things, Miles is presented as a rather domineering antagonist, enforcing the side of the law that Phoenix struggles to even hold a candle to. And then, in the final case of the first game, they do something great. They reveal to you that Miles is actually the soft bitch of his family, and his relatives are coming to beat the shit out of you. In our final case of Game 1, Turnabout Goodbyes, Miles finds himself not behind the prosecutor's bench, but sitting squarely in the defendant's chair. He was found at the scene of the murder with the murder weapon in his hand, and things are not looking good for his innocence. What's more, because he was such a passionate prosecutor, trampling defense attorneys and securing guilty verdicts everywhere he went, no lawyer worth their salt wants to defend him. And so it falls on Phoenix, who has quite literally been waiting for this very moment his whole life.
I'm glad I finally get my chance to repay you.
For what? What did I do?
Never mind, we can talk about that later.
But that creates an element of mystery going into the trial. If Miles isn't the prosecutor, then whom? As it turns out, the person prosecuting is actually the very man who trained Miles. Not only that, it's the man who adopted and raised Miles when he was orphaned as a young boy, a legendary prosecutor named Manfred von Karma. Manfred von Karma's win record is perfect, without fault. He's gone undefeated for longer than Phoenix has been alive. His presence is designed to intimidate. Not only does he look like a dehydrated Dracula, but his personality leaves no room for challenge. He prides himself on short and quick trials, declaring to the whole court that the trial will be over in minutes. He treats the trial like it's not life or death, but simply another task on a long checklist of things he needs to do that day. In Ace Attorney, sprite animations contain a huge amount of character and are incredibly effective at using a limited medium, in this case the Game Boy screen, to tell us who a character really is, what they're like, and who they're close to. That's a whole different essay I can make, and people probably have and done it better than I could, honestly. But let's look at one of Manfred's sprites here, this signature waggling of his finger. It tells us that he's condescending, and it's a trait he shares with his two proteges, Miles and his youngest daughter, Franziska. But Manfred's is especially effective because it's one of the longest animations in the game, and there's no way to skip through these sprite animations like you would with text. Every time Manfred stops to do this, you as a player are forced to sit there and wait for him to finish. You're at his mercy, and he is in control. He punctuates his sentences with a powerful snap of his fingers. He undermines the judge, and he gets away with it. He sustains his own objections. Even his objection is imposing and scary. Just listen to it. Objection! The game wants you to know that Manfred von Karma is not to be fucked with. He is a perfect final boss, and you have no hope of beating him. But you must.
And I knew what I had to do. I pulled the trigger!
From this point on, I'm going to talk about spoilers for this case and all of Ace Attorney as a whole. If you're new to the series and I've piqued your interest, I cannot encourage you enough to go play even just this first game. Like, if you just want to stop watching the video, leave right now, and go download Ace Attorney, you should. It's always on sale. It's on every platform that exists. Usually the trilogy is like $5 a game. You should go and buy Ace Attorney because it's a life-changing series, and I swear to fucking God, Capcom, pay me. And if you're staying, then settle in. Let's talk about the conclusion to this final case. Before we do that, though, let's turn it back a little. On December 28th, 2001, Miles Edgeworth and his father Gregory entered the courthouse elevator. It had been a long day at trial, and after a year-long case, Gregory, a defense attorney, had walked away defeated. Manfred von Karma, the prosecutor on this case, had managed to secure victory and his guilty verdict over Gregory's client. This victory came with a price, though. Gregory had challenged some of the evidence, only to bring to light that Manfred, who himself was being unknowingly manipulated by a higher power, forced a false confession. Said higher power, without revealing his puppetry to Manfred, struck him with a penalty, the first scar on his perfect record. Shaken, Manfred fell into a dissociative episode, wandering the courthouse for hours in a daze. In the time he was blacked out, an earthquake struck the courthouse, knocking out the power. At this precise moment, Miles and Gregory were trapped in the elevator with Yanni Yogi, a court bailiff. They, too, stayed trapped in there for hours while the oxygen slowly depleted. At some point, lack of oxygen caused Yogi to snap, and he attacked Gregory in a rage. 10-year-old Miles, spotting the gun that had fallen from his holster and wanting to protect his father, grabbed the gun and threw it. A single gunshot and then a blood-curdling scream echoed out before Miles passed out. Finally, the power returned, just as Manfred neared the elevator himself. The stray bullet that flew from Miles' throwing of the gun pierced Manfred's shoulder, and he cried out in pain. When the elevator doors opened, he saw 3 unconscious bodies and the shining golden badge of the man who just humiliated him in court. Bleeding, enraged, and raving, he picked the gun up off the floor and shot Gregory Edgeworth point blank in the heart. Manfred fled the scene to unknown coordinates. He didn't seek medical attention lest he make a witness out of a doctor, choosing instead to convalesce alone in the darkness while the case of Gregory's murder went cold. This case would therefore be known by law enforcement solely by its alphanumerical, the DL6 incident. To say DL6 is pivotal to the story is an understatement. DL6 is much more than that. DL6 is the cause of every single iota of misery in the Ace Attorney trilogy. If you have a favorite character in Ace Attorney, just think of them right now. Picture them in your mind's eye. Whoever you're thinking of, I can almost guarantee that DL6 in some way, shape, or form altered or ruined their life. Even if you think at first that the inciting incident was something else, it likely traces back to DL6 when given enough thought. So let's let that sink in. Manfred von Karma, one man, is the source of all the pain and misery in this series. This is, in large part, why he might be my favorite villain of all time. 15 years after the DL6 incident, Manfred does something very interesting. There's no way to connect him to this crime committed. No one saw him at the scene. He didn't leave blood behind, fingerprints, nothing. He strives for perfection, and through dumb luck alone, he murdered perfectly. No one could have ever suspected him, but for some reason, Manfred chooses to make the connection himself. On the 15-year anniversary of DL6, Manfred decides, for reasons mostly unknown, that he's going to frame his protege, Miles Edgeworth, for murder. So after the DL6 incident, Miles had nowhere to go. Depending on which interpretation of canon you follow, it's very heavily implied that Manfred full-on adopted him as his own son. Only one interpretation of canon ever tells us why he does this, and it's a dubious one at best. But the fact of the matter is, Miles was taken in by Manfred, who, unbeknownst to him, murdered his father in cold blood. By Miles' own admission, though, he's close with Manfred and respects him a great deal. So when Miles finds out he'll be prosecuting him in court the day of his own trial, needless to say, he's a bit shaken. The truth of the case is this. Manfred sent a letter to Yanni Yogi, now an old man living a life of disgrace after he took the fall for Gregory's murder as the only reasonable suspect. Manfred says, "Hey, that defense attorney who told you to plead insanity and ruined your life, I'll arrange for him to meet you at this location. Shoot him dead, steal his clothes, dump his body, and fake his identity. Take a rowboat out on the lake and plant the gun in the hands of the little kid who was never even considered a suspect. Get your revenge on both these men at once." And he had Yogi send a separate letter to Miles like, "Sup, do you want to go out on the lake and talk about our feelings regarding your dead dad?" And Miles was like, "Sure, I'll clear my schedule." There are a lot of moving parts in this case, but I'll spare you the details because they don't entirely matter when it comes to the point that I'm trying to make. Here's what matters. Manfred von Karma killed 2 innocent men. 2 innocent men who did not deserve death. What's more, he orphaned a child who developed lasting PTSD and was never, ever the same. That is on top of all the lives DL6 ruined just by consequence. He is, quite arguably, one of the most despicable people in Ace Attorney canon. This is a huge part of why I like him. His unashamed villainy and how almost exaggerated it can be when you lay it all out like this is compelling, and even sometimes hilarious to me. As it were, he is doing too much. Before we talk about what he didn't do, though, let's talk about why we're here in the first place. Fanon. Part 3! Manfred von HARMA. It's the best it was the best I could do. I'm funny! Wiktionary defines Fanon as elements introduced by fans which are not in the official canon of a fictional world, but are widely believed to be or treated as if canonical. Simply put, Fanon is what happens when a lot of fans of a certain piece of media collectively sort of agree on certain things that aren't actually hard canon. Sometimes so much that the fan interpretations overtake canon and people lose sight of what is actually present in the source. Sarah Zed has a really good video that talks in depth about Fanon and different iterations of it, which I'll link in the description below. I'm a big fan of her content, if the everything about this video didn't give it away.
Naramitsu is canon.
Fanon is at the crux of this video essay, and at the crux of AA Twit losing its absolute shit at some relative nobody apparently presenting a hot take in their little corner. Fanon Manfred is kind of the bane of my existence because it's made talking about any nuance present in his character nigh impossible. So when I talk about Fanon Manfred, or FANFRED as he will now be called, what exactly am I talking about? Specifically, I'm talking about the interpretation of his character that I see mostly prevalent in Tumblr, Twitter, and the fanfiction website Archive of Our Own, AO3 for short, as spaces. I'm sure it exists elsewhere, and I will talk a little bit about some of what I've seen in other spaces that I've spent less time in, but these are ultimately the places I happen to frequent fandom most often, so they're what I'm going to talk about. This interpretation pretty universally places Manfred as an unrepentant child abuser. The extent of this abuse varies from fanwork to fanwork. Most often it's verbal, but occasionally it's physical instead of or in tandem. Usually this abuse is directed at Miles, but often bleeds into Manfred's other protege and biological daughter, Francisca, as well. Some alternate takes propose that one of them is the favored child and the other is wholly disposable in Manfred's eyes. Again, which is which can vary. I'm not going to go into explicit detail about this, but just for a quick visual aid, let's utilize AO3's tag filtering system. As of this moment, if you go into Manfred's character tag on AO3, there are over 1,000 total works that he features or makes a notable appearance in. AO3 is a really cool website that allows you to filter out tags you might not want to see, so I've gone ahead and done that with all the child abuse tags that I see commonly used on the site, as well as a special custom tag that the AA fandom has for Manfred specifically. That should be the first indication that this particular interpretation about him is common. AO3 tags work in such a way that if enough people tag fix with a consistent tag, the tag becomes more cemented or easily searchable. More or less it becomes like canonized, and it'll pop up as a suggested tag when you're tagging your own works or searching through others. Manfred von Karma being an asshole is such a common tag used by so many people and so consistently that it fits this definition. That should tell you in a few words how common this Fanon interpretation of him is. So with that in mind, when you filter all these tags out, the work count is knocked down by about 150 works, just shaven right off the bat. This actually undersells the phenomenon, because this is, one, only the works that people bothered to tag him in, and two, only the works they bothered to content tag. There are countless fics, for instance, that are about Miles and or Francisca, where Manfred might just be mentioned in passing or in one single line or scene, but his proposed abuse is a part of the narrative important to them as characters nonetheless. So these numbers don't even fully exemplify the problem. Having spent some time in multiple AA fan spaces to varying degrees of enjoyment, I've noticed this interpretation only really seems prevalent on Tumblr, Twitter, and AO3. In other fan spaces that I have spent a little bit of time in, like Discord servers, forums, on YouTube, and Twitch communities, I literally don't see this anywhere. That evidence is, of course, anecdotal, but I think it deserves to be examined regardless because it kind of sort of leads into my next point. The question being, why is this the prevailing interpretation on these websites? Well, I mean, that one's easy for me to answer. These are websites that have a loud and outspoken percentage of both queer and neurodivergent fans, myself included. Miles and Francisca, Manfred's kids, are incredibly queer-coded, with Miles and Phoenix having a dynamic and a deep, rich friendship that is way easier to read as something romantic, and Francisca being the quintessential stereotype of the mean, man-hating lesbian, which I can say because I'm also a mean man-hating lesbian. The neurodivergence too is front and center. Both of them are very autistic coded, which again is a topic I could make a whole other video on. Miles, though, isn't simply coded as being neurodivergent. He very loudly, very canonically has post-traumatic stress disorder that causes him to struggle with everyday life. This is played straight and normalized in canon, where he blacks out and suffers from flashbacks and panic attacks during earthquakes or anything resembling them, like airplane turbulence, for instance. There's no disputing this. Miles is neurodivergent, that is canon, and it cannot be erased about him. It is a major part of his character. Historically, queer and neurodivergent people aren't treated very well by, well, anyone, including our own parents. We have sky-high rates of child abuse among us for these perceived imperfections, and the rest really just writes itself. A father obsessed with perfection who raised two kids to have similar standards for themselves. Kids who crumble when they don't meet those standards. When it comes to fandom, we tend to latch on to characters that we see ourselves in, and we write what we know, and unfortunately, what a lot of us know is heartbreak. This is bolstered by another thing I noticed just anecdotally, having read through the entire Manfred tag a million times. People who are attached to Miles and Francisca tend to write him as an abuser, and people who are attached to any of the characters who hang around Manfred before DL6, like Gregory, Gant, and Blaze, often do not write him as an abuser. So, to get this out of the way, there is literally nothing wrong with any of this. I don't want anyone to think, listening to me talk about this, that there is something shameful or wrong in not only projecting onto characters, but making beautiful art where they share your pain or your experiences. That is why we make art. And I don't find myself thinking often that there is such a thing as bad art, especially not when it comes to fan fiction and fan art, which are things we make for free just because we as people love something so much that we cannot contain it and we have to share it with others. Not to mention, there's nothing in canon that contradicts that opinion about Manfred anyways. If you truly believe he is abusive and you derive joy in making art that depicts that abuse, or if you derive catharsis from it, or just any emotion that makes you happy, then I support you with my whole heart. There is no problem if you want to write him that way. And if writing him that way is a form of healing for you, I want you to write it to your heart's content. I want you to write and write and write until one day you feel better. And then I want you to write some more. Listen, I love you. I feel you. I understand. So, what's the problem here? Why am I making this video where I so vehemently fight for my opposite perspective? Well, the problem is that this opinion has become so parroted that it has now been more or less canonized in the eyes of swaths of people who accept it at face value and maybe don't read much further into things than that. People who feel very strongly that this is the game they played about Manfred von Karma, known child abuser. This is not canon. As I've said, this is a headcanon, and even for all of the things we have tangible proof of Manfred doing, we have no proof that he ever abused his kids.
In order to find the perfect proof of his guilt.
Perfect proof. Don't make me laugh.
Here's the line.
A worthless.
Say it! Say it! Say it! Say the line! Make it hurt, Sonic. Say it. So, as previously mentioned, I don't really engage with the FANFRED crowd. With all due respect to them, it's just kind of hard for me to get along with people who hate my favorite characters. I ignore, I block, I live in my bubble. But I have been exposed from time to time to some of their own arguments, and most of the time, when they do bring any evidence to the table beyond just, he's evil, evil man, also hurt kids. It's the same single point over and over. When challenged on this point, what basis do we have for Manfred von Karma being abusive to his children? Here is the one single piece of evidence that Team FANFRED brings to the table. These lines from case 1-4 of Ace Attorney Miles Edgeworth, Investigations. Here, Manfred brushes off his daughter's attempt to connect with him and calls Miles worthless to his face. Undoubtedly, and without question, there is no part of this that is not incredibly fucked up. So why am I about to present counterpoints to this? Well, because they exist. And so I must. Point 1. The Ace Attorney Investigations games, which are spin-offs from the main line, need to be considered the dubious canon that they are. These games were not written or directed by the series' original writer, Shu Takumi, and as such, there are a lot of little inconsistencies in characterization that seem to fly over the AAI team's heads. For example, the biggest one for me personally is how in the AA trilogy, Franziska never ever uses her whip on Miles. This might be a detail that not everyone picks up on, but Franziska makes a point to only whip certain people. For instance, she's incredibly reluctant to whip women, the only exception being Lotta Hart, who notably compromised her brother's murder trial. And Maya, once in Turnabout Big Top, which I don't know what that was about. I mean, it was Turnabout Big Top. We were all a little stressed out. When it comes to Miles, she only ever whips him once in the OG trilogy during the final case, Bridge to the Turnabout, when he's having a PTSD episode and trying to push himself past it instead of taking care of himself. Franziska's a protective person and she loves Miles a lot. This is her version of slapping some sense into him, so it makes sense that this is the one point where she whips him. The fact that Miles is the only man Franziska won't whip is supposed to tell us without words that she loves him. Franziska is not a person who's vocal about her emotions, so her actions do all the talking. The people who wrote the original trilogy understood this about her. In AAI, this incredibly important detail about her is ignored. She just whips Miles willy-nilly like he's an unruly show horse over just about anything. All that to say, the AAI team has their own interpretations of these characters that definitely differ from what Takumi probably had planned for them. There are subtleties they miss and choices they made that might seem obvious up front, but fall apart under a microscope. This is kind of how I feel about Manfred being kind of a shitty dad here, especially because, point 2, this is out of character even for this game. Like, okay, so Turnabout Reminiscence is one of my favorite cases of all time. It's a case I have memorized front to back, and these lines come out of fucking nowhere. Like, I used to, before bed, just open up the Ace Attorney wiki and, like, go to the transcript for this page, and I would just read it like a bedtime story. I can assure you, these lines come out of nowhere. The tone set for Miles and Manfred's relationship at the beginning of the case isn't adversarial or unpleasant. They talk about the case with one another, they take turns proposing ideas and theories, and Miles listens enraptured, hanging on Manfred's every word. He wants to do good. He wants to be perfect, and Manfred wants to see to it that he achieved that goal. If Rel and Faraday, the victims of this case, hadn't gotten murdered, we would have gotten Manfred as co-counsel. Every day of my life, I think about how we were robbed of that. Seeing him and Miles prosecute side by side, like having Manfred be like how Mia was in the first case of the original Ace Attorney, just offering advice and helping him along. It makes me crazy. Nothing leads up to this line about Miles being worthless in Manfred's eyes. It's weird, confrontational, triggered by nothing, and way out of left field. Not to mention directly contradictory to what Manfred said at the beginning of the case, claiming to expect perfection from Miles. It's a weird fucking outburst, a sudden statement, which brings me to point 3. The point that AA Twitter, I guess, treated like some kind of silly, nonsensical thing to say. Point 3. Lead poisoning. And as much as I would love to elaborate on what the fuck I mean by that now, that's something we have to put a pin in for later, because I want to talk about it in a different part of this essay, so just keep that in the back of your mind. I'm sure you were already thinking of it and waiting for me to say it. Even if we do decide to consider AAI indisputable canon, then that, I feel, opens up a whole new can of worms. If AAI is canon material, what else can we consider canon material? Because I've got quite a lot of material of one Manfred von Karma from other dubiously canon sources, and, the FANFRED crowd, they ain't gonna like it.
What's wrong? We came all the way here so you could eat pancakes.
I know.
This is the part where I get to self-indulgently tell you guys about all my favorite interpretations in secondary canon about Manfred, and how more of them point to him being loving than not. So there's a lot of Ace Attorney mangas by a lot of different artists, publishers, and writers, and most of them are absolute nonsense, just kind of meant to be read for supplemental fun. That said, I really like to consider the things present in them that aren't wholly contradicted by canon, like Manfred keeping no less than 5 photos of Franziska on him at all times and showing them off to his opposing counsel with little to no prompting. In the AAI manga, we have him screaming at Detective Bad to keep a careful watch on his kids, not wanting to deny them their time at a real crime scene investigation, but being worried to the point of seething rage, and as AA prosecutors do, threatening to cut his salary if he disobeys. Quick sidebar into another comic I really like from this manga that isn't like super relevant, but Manfred here getting his fifis hurt because Kay calls him scary. I really love this because 1, it's a parallel to Pearl doing the same thing to Franziska in Bridge to the Turnabout, and 2, it's just really funny that Von Karmas want little girls to like them and view them as heroes of justice so bad, but are just constantly thwarted by their resting bitch face. Like, Manfred has 2 daughters, and he's so used to little girls thinking he's cool. In the live action movie, we have this beautiful scene where Manfred and Miles talk about the importance of not losing yourself in the pursuit of courtroom victory.
私もカルマ先生のようになりたいと思っています。検事になって40年間無敗。常に勝ち続ける。
それは結果であって目的ではない。この際だから言っとくがね。君はあまり評判が良くない。裁判で勝つことも確かに大事だが、何をやってもいいというわけじゃないからな。
はい。
I really love Manfred in this movie. My friend once described him as someone's grandpa who's just lost in the mall. In the anime, oh, the anime. Let me count the ways I love thee. This is a controversial opinion for some reason, but the Ace Attorney anime, while not a replacement for the games, is probably my favorite take on the characterization in the world. I like it better than the games most days. So in the anime, in the aftermath of DL6, Manfred comes to move Miles out of his empty childhood home. Seeing him balled up and unresponsive on the couch, Manfred takes off the scarf he's wearing and wraps it tenderly around Miles before escorting him out of the house. This is offset immediately by Manfred taking Miles' special friendship keychain and tossing it in the trash. And that, I love this scene front to back because it just perfectly encapsulates the duality of him for me. Loving, parental, and then heartbreakingly harsh. This is one of my favorite scenes of Manfred ever. I feel like the people who wrote it really kind of understood what makes him appealing to me. By Miles' own admission, he considers Manfred the only person who was there for him after his father died.
From that moment, my eyes were opened forever. I hated criminals and the scum that defended them. Only one person was on my side back then, Manfred von Karma.
And he adopted you.
He taught me justice should be perfect, completely divorced from trivial emotions, and used as a hammer to crush those who dare defy the law.
But the thing I'm most excited to talk about is Sound the Turnabout Melody, an anime-only episode about Miles' life growing up with the Von Karmas. This single episode is my favorite piece of Ace Attorney media in the history of Ace Attorney. Here's the plot. A teenage Miles has been living with the Von Karmas for a few years now, and it's established early on that it's an impermanent thing. Manfred is fostering him while looking for orphanages to house him, and Miles is hot off the heels of his father's murder and obviously not doing well. Franziska von Karma, age 8, is a bubbly little girl who's enamored with the new boy who's been living in her home, and she's noticed, most importantly, that he never smiles, ever. Franziska doesn't stand for things that she believes she can change, and so she spends the whole episode trying to figure out ways to get Miles to crack a grin.
なんでこんなことを?
だってレイジ、いつもそんな顔だから。
Franziska, being little and not knowing Miles is grieving, can only pull from what she loves, so she marches up to Manfred and demands that he take them to trial, take them to the mall, and take them to fucking IHOP.
Pancakes.
And Manfred complies with all of this. He buys Franziska Build-A-Bear, and when she's too sad for pancakes because Miles has run off after his dog, the two of them go searching. By the way, Miles has a dog in the Ace Attorney anime, and Manfred just lets him keep it. Like, he doesn't act weird or controlling about it. He doesn't force Miles to give the dog away. He just says, okay, take your dog with you to our giant mansion, and that's what happens. So the reason Miles ran off is because he happened upon a criminal, this woman named Goldie, who was trying to steal reward money for this other lost dog. Miles' key character trait is that he ultimately wants to live his life seeking the truth. So he confronts Goldie about her wrongdoing, sees through her lies, and calls her out for what she's attempting to do. Manfred and Franziska find Miles as he's in the middle of this, and Manfred silently tells Franziska to fall back with him and watch. Miles fights valiantly, and when Goldie begins to get unruly, his surrogates step in, their twin presences imposing as they protect Miles. There's this beautiful shot of Manfred's signature powerful finger snap, his eyes burning into her, and little baby Franziska with her riding crop just ready to throw down with a grown woman 3 times her size in true Franziska fashion. Miles is a part of their family. They love him. Miles apologizes for all the trouble. Manfred says, let's get pancakes. Miles wins several $1,000s in reward money for finding a lost dog and says, can I donate it to an animal shelter? And Manfred says, of course you can. It's your money. Like I said before, Manfred was intending on only looking after Miles temporarily as a foster parent. And here's what really gets me. He states, outright, that he suspects this impulse came from guilt.
I've been wondering what made me adopt that boy 3 years ago, when he was so hurt over the loss of his father. And I think today I finally began to understand how he ended up in this situation. It wasn't because of my guilt. I simply wanted to see where the path of pain would lead us, and how he would eventually develop. Karma has a strange way of showing itself.
In this monologue at the end of the episode, he says in few words that he regrets what he did and views taking on Miles as his karma for it. There's another very prevalent headcanon that I often see from the FANFRED crowd, one that states that it is indisputable canon that Manfred von Karma intentionally groomed Miles to be a prosecutor, purposefully raising him into the image of himself. Manfred is a notably vengeful person, so the implication here was that he did it to really stick it to Gregory, who was a defense attorney. This is ridiculous on Manfred's part, of course. Gregory wouldn't care what Miles decided to do with his life, so long as Miles was happy. I totally understand why this is a popular headcanon, but it is, once again, not my interpretation, and not the anime's interpretation either. So this episode is, at its core, about Miles feeling lost and alone, like he has nowhere, like he has no future. When he was younger, he wanted to be a defense attorney, like his dad, but he doesn't want that anymore. It reminds him of what he's lost. In the climax of this episode, Manfred watches him corner this criminal and thinks quietly, well, are you a prosecutor then? At the end of this episode, after Franziska and Manfred have solidified his importance in their family, we get one of the best scenes in the whole anime.
You can wear this from now on, if you would like.
Thanks!
Manfred ties Miles' signature cravat around his neck. Miles understands that this gesture means he's a part of their family. He has a place he belongs. And for the first time in years, he smiles with his whole face. Franziska stands there, literally in his shadow, and she smiles too, because this is, after all, what she wanted all along. She doesn't care if she gets left behind in the end. She got to see him happy. The episode ends with Miles finally feeling as though he's found his truth, his place in the world. And he found it on his own, not because some wicked and imposing presence groomed it into him. In fact, it's quite the opposite.
Will you follow in your father's footsteps?
I'm not quite sure.
Another thing is, many people interpret Manfred as losing respect for Miles, berating him or being otherwise cruel and abusive to him when he loses his first case in Turnabout Sisters. In the anime, he's just perplexed.
Victory after victory. It's truly been impressive.
Thank you, sir.
That being said, it does make your defeat more vexing.
I humbly apologize.
Cast your feelings aside. The only justice is conviction.
I understand, Mr. von Karma.
Manfred gives Miles some advice about not having feelings. It's cliche anime villain, but fuck's sake, like, it's not cruel and unusual. The anime is very careful to establish that even though Manfred as a person is very stern and icy, he's still someone who cares for Miles in his own sort of way. In every single canon I can think of, there's more evidence that Manfred was exactly as he seems. Again, a stern mentor who's cold and calculating and precise, but who has a clear charisma, especially in court, and functions as Miles' rock in the aftermath of DL6. In every single canon, Miles loves and respects him. Miles wants to be more like him. Miles views him as an irrefutable part of getting through the trauma of his father's death. Franziska, too, talks about him with stars in her eyes in every canon. He's everything she aspires to be. He's her hero. Fanworks where Manfred forced these children to be mindless prosecuting machines pale entirely in comparison to what is in these dubious canons, where they choose what they do because they want to stand tall beside him.
Don't fool yourself. Do you think you're some sort of superhero? You're just a man. You talk about saving people, but that's not what normal men do.
Well, why don't you tell me why you came back to the courtroom? What's this great answer you found?
The truth. I'll fight for it with all I have. It's that simple.
The truth, huh?
Once again, let's talk about what Manfred von Karma is, instead of what I personally believe he isn't. Manfred von Karma is a despicable fucking human being. He robbed two men of their lives. He ruined the life of every single character in the OG trilogy. Every single horrible thing that's ever happened in Ace Attorney's OG trilogy happened because of him. And it didn't even happen for a good reason. It happened because he was a petty, vengeful, impulsive coward of a fucking man who couldn't process or face head-on one single meaningless imperfection. It happened because there was a gun at his feet and there was no one around to stop him. And he almost got away with it. He was so close. He is a murderer and arguably a cold, calculating manipulator. He's both a fucking idiot and highly intelligent in covering his tracks. He's all these things. So why does he also have to be abusive? Doesn't that kind of blunt the tragedy of it all? Tell me, what's a more heartbreaking story to you? A monster of a man, imposing and cruel to his protégés, controlling and vile and unconvinced of their worth, exposed for the murderer, for the criminal he is? Or Manfred von Karma, stern-browed but loving father who leads them with a steady hand and holds them when they falter, who was supposed to be their guiding star and who turned out to be the monster in the shadows all along? What's more compelling? Miles and Franziska finding out the truth and shrugging it off like, well, yeah, that makes sense? Or Miles and Franziska curled up in one another's arms in an empty house in Germany, desperately combing their memory in tatters, trying to look for a sign. Any sign, anything that could have pinpointed, that could have clued them in on the fact that he... But of course there wouldn't be anything like that. Von Karma is perfect. So, Turnabout Goodbyes. What the fuck is going on with Turnabout Goodbyes, given all this analysis I've just presented? Because while DL6 was a spur-of-the-moment atrocity, something Manfred did when he was at his lowest and driven to the brink, the murder of Robert Hammond and subsequent framing of Miles Edgeworth was insanely premeditated, like, premeditated to the nth degree. Every single trick Manfred learned from putting violent criminals away throughout the years, he took for his own playbook to ensure he wouldn't leave a trace of truth behind. And then, in taking the case on himself, he was intent to exert his full control over the trial, able to shut the defense down with his intimidating presence just in case they begin to find a thread of that truth. Many people have pointed this out, but Manfred von Karma, by the end of this case, reads as cartoonishly evil, and as previously established, that's one of my favorite things about him. Even just ignoring the actual actions here, they very clearly wanted him to be that way. Look at how menacing and devious even just his official art looks. Simply put, in the game's final case, where Manfred features most heavily, despite a lot of other material that suggests otherwise, he is kind of crazy and unhinged. And I'm legally diagnosed as a crazy, so I'm fine to say that. There is something wrong with him. There are so many things wrong with him. But the thing is, people are not just born good or evil, and people do not just become good or evil. Ace Attorney is, by definition, a game about how corrupt justice as a system can truly become when not challenged, and Phoenix Wright is meant to be its direct challenger, almost always defending the falsely accused. While AA doesn't outright decry punitive justice, it does at the very least make you think harder about it and how faulty it can be. Let's look at Miles, for example. Miles Edgeworth is, by all accounts, a good person. That is to say, he's a person who ultimately chooses to do the right thing often. Miles, despite his stony and regal exterior, is a man who is incredibly warm. When he was a young boy, he wanted to be a defense attorney because he wanted to protect society's most vulnerable. He wanted to protect people who had no one in their corner fighting for them. But then trauma happened. Miles went through something no one, especially not a child, should have to go through. And suddenly he was all the things he was before, but with all that pain on top of it. His wants and needs and ideals, they twisted. Miles choosing to be a prosecutor comes from the same place as him wanting to be a defense attorney. He wanted to protect who he viewed as the people who needed protecting. But now that he had seen court from the perspective of someone close to the victim, he realized he never wanted to be behind the defense's bench defending someone who might have taken or ruined lives. In being a prosecutor, he could instead punish evil, avenge these victims, and all who were close to them. In a way, Miles literally became a prosecutor to #cope. On top of that, there's a piece of Miles that believes he was responsible for his father's death, and one of his key character traits is an immense guilt complex because of this. I once saw someone describe Miles Edgeworth as someone who isn't religious but definitely believes that hell exists and that he's going there, and to this day, no one's really got it more right than that. All that to say, Miles is also doing to these suspects what he believes should be done unto him. Everything about his sudden career choice happened because he's in a lot of pain, and on some level, conscious or subconscious, he believes that punitive justice will offer him closure. Speaking as a victim of trauma myself, this is incredibly common for us. Justin McElroy once said that the opposite of despair is action. This really resonates with me. I'm a very actionable person in the face of my problems, and I think it's safe to say that that's what Miles is doing here. Trauma is not something we can control, which makes it feel hopeless to overcome. Punishing people who you think might deserve that punishment, even if they didn't personally do anything to you, but maybe to people you see yourself in, is often the closest that trauma victims can get to feeling as though justice has been served. This is another reason why I think people identify with Miles, and I think a vast majority of them are the kind of people who took very strong issue with some of the stuff I was saying on Twitter. You know, the kind of people who have kill your local pedophile patches on their mall-bought denim jackets and retweet things like murder all rapists all day. This punishment and violence is their knee-jerk reaction to the cruelty that exists in the world, even though it's been proven time and time again to be ineffective at reforming society as a whole. I'm not going to go on my whole prison abolitionist anti-punitive justice spiel. It's what I believe, and I'm not particularly interested in debating it when my eloquence is a bit conditional to whatever I'm most autistic about. But why am I bringing all of this up? Well, because Miles' strident stance on punitive justice is something that he's forced to re-examine in the narrative. Ace Attorney makes a point to let us know that justice is not black and white, that the world is not simply made of good and evil. Oftentimes, true criminals in cases are sympathetic, pushed to their limits. Sometimes murders are outright accidents, and more often than not, the prime suspect in these cases is not the true culprit at all. And then there's Manfred von Karma, who is not in any regard meant to be sympathetic. As far as villains go, the blaze of glory he goes out in is as evil as it gets. But by then, Ace Attorney has conditioned you, the player, to look deeper into the truth of these things and why they happen. In real life and in fiction, people are rarely just made despicable. Maybe in fiction they can be, but I'm not interested in flat characters who are evil simply because they revel in destruction. It's fine if you are. I'm interested in understanding them, like I would a regular person, a regular criminal. Kill your local abuser is not a battle cry that I identify with as an abuse victim, who, even at their core, would really rather just see my abusers die, sure. But that's not productive, and my abusers dying won't undo or make better the shit they did to me. How do we stop people from becoming abusers is the vein that I follow instead. So, in this world I live in, where Manfred was not an abusive father, but still indisputably did all this shit to Miles in our final case of Game 1, what happened to him? That's what I like to think about, and here's what I think. Turnabout Goodbyes is very interesting, because Manfred plans all of this to take place on the 15-year anniversary of the DL6 incident, but that 15-year mark is also when the statute of limitations runs out. This means that when the final 24 hours rolls over, DL6 legally never happened. The case can't be reopened. It's done with. The anime's canon, the one I personally think is the most nuanced and interesting, proposes that Manfred felt guilt over killing Gregory. Maybe not the act of killing this innocent man, but certainly over orphaning a young boy who had done no wrong. So with that in mind, here's what I think was going through Manfred's head. I think with the statute of limitations approaching and the guilt weighing on his mind, Manfred was simply unable to leave it alone. Part of him wanted to make this weight on his conscience stop, and another stronger part of him didn't want to rot alone in a jail cell. I think that as the days tick down to December 28th, 28th, 2016, this conflict tangled inside of him until it became ugly and twisted and twice as vengeful. And Manfred did all he could think to do. He blamed Miles. He blamed Miles and how he loved Miles for forcing him to feel like a human. Miles, who was a small carbon copy of the man who ruined him. Miles, who never smiled and wailed in the dead of night when the terrors would take hold. Miles, who blacked out during earthquakes growing up and insisted they take the stairs. In my own interpretation of events, Manfred witnessed this boy come into adolescence and was forced every day to see the direct impact of the murder of his father, like he says in the anime. And I think it's this guilt that led him to the events of Goodbyes. Unable to work up the courage to confess to what he'd done, he instead turned it on Miles. How dare you make me doubt? How dare you make me suffer after all I've done for you? Must I be reminded of all I took away? I'll punish you like I punished everyone else. And on top of that, we're back to the lead poisoning. Again, this is apparently what AA Twitter stuck on. Not any of the more eloquently phrased points on my list here. No, they kind of just watered my argument down to, well, murder is okay because Blorbo had lead poisoning, which isn't really what I was saying. I just think it's another avenue of crazy to explore. What made Manfred so fucking crazy in Goodbyes? What's with his weird outbursts, like calling Miles worthless out of nowhere, or screaming in the middle of court because the trial wasn't over in his proposed time frame? This is actually one of my favorite scenes of him. Like, I fucking love him screaming because 3 minutes have passed. What the fuck is wrong with him? People are not just born with something wrong with them. Their neuroses and behaviors are fostered by external factors, and that's how they come into who they are. I just personally happen to think that one of Manfred's external factors is lead poisoning. Homeboy left a bullet in his shoulder for 15 years, and while I know that retained bullets don't actually have a huge risk of doing that, I also know this is Ace Attorney, where we cross-examine parrots and consider their testimony admissible in court. I humbly invite Twitter to just have some fucking fun with me, for Christ's sakes. I really don't think that villains need to have tragic backstories or be justified in their actions, and I really hope that's not the takeaway anyone has from this video. Ultimately, I just wish that when people are hating villains for their wrongdoing, they would do so for the actual wrongdoings they committed. Manfred von Karma is guilty of murder, conspiracy, forgery, theft, assault, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, perjury, and probably several other things I don't feel like remembering. I don't have a problem pointing at this and screaming, hey, check out my shitty Blorbo and his shitty Blorbo crimes. I literally just don't think he's an abusive father. That's it. That was not my interpretation of the text. And to me, personally, it makes for a less interesting story. It's literally just that I personally find the story less compelling if he was abusive. That's it. I find it shallow. I would much rather read about someone loved and revered exposed for the monster they are. I want to read stories about Francisca shattering into nothing and sobbing in his room when she gets the call from Miles, trying desperately not to think about the way her father used to sing her lullabies and bring her sweets and teach her calligraphy. I want Miles to be trembling in the defendant's chair while that metal detector beeps. I want him to be staring at his shaking hands, unable to believe it, trying to find any other line of thought. I don't want their reactions to any of this to be, yeah, that tracks. I want denial. I want heartbreak. I want screaming in the detention center as they tearfully disown him. It's fine if that's not what you want, but I'm tired of the reception that my take gets in fandom. You know, people on Twitter and on Tumblr too have not only forgotten this rule about not engaging with headcanons that you hate, but they're insistent that their interpretation is the only one. They act as though FANFRED von HARMA is the only truth, universally agreed upon, and likewise they act as though he's a character without fans who love him like anyone else. They act as though this abuse is canon, and they call us apologists for disagreeing. Like I said before, if you need to process some shit you went through growing up, I love you. I mean that. If you want to write what you know, I love you. That's what I do too. I largely write what I know. Most of my Ace Attorney fanfiction is just me projecting onto Francisca for, anywhere from 5,000 to 20,000 words. I get it. Just understand that I, as an abuse survivor myself, I'm not always compelled by narratives of abuse. I'm certainly not compelled by the ones I see written in this regard, which are usually just outright torture porn about the characters I relate to. I wasn't given a happy, loving home growing up. It's for this reason that I want to give the characters I love and relate to what I was deprived of. My toxic trait is I do think I can change anyone's mind about Manfred von Karma, and maybe I can, maybe I can't. I want to, though. I want to shift the narrative away from this my way or the highway mentality. If I didn't, that's okay. But if I did for you, you know, leave a comment maybe. I don't know. Talk to me. I don't know. He's my favorite villain ever. Ever. Just ever. That's my spiel. If you're here to leave hate comments or call me a freak or a pro shipper or whatever word you guys use that week, please do. I don't read it, but it does help the algorithm, so feel free. I only saw a little bit of the weird drama on Twitter, but regardless, I'd like to thank everyone who was vile to me for really pushing me to get off my ass and make this video. Like I said, I was planning on it anyways, but I was just kind of like throwing it on the back burner, like, you know what he wants, so nobody's gonna fucking watch that shit. And now I know that it will at least get hate clicks, so that rocks. I'm not really a YouTuber. I'm just like an autistic who likes to talk a lot about fictional lawyers, I guess. So subscribe if you want, or don't. I'm not your dad. Thanks a ton for watching. Sparkle on, and don't forget to be yourself. I can't leave that in. Papa, what the fuck was that? You go home. No, you can't just say that to him.
It's the lead poisoning, Francisca. Don't worry about it.
Oh yeah, wait,
He'll
what?
fucking punch you in the shoulder.